This morning, I was flipping through my calendar and discovered that it's been 3 months since I interviewed Sam Abuelsamid, EV analyst for Guidehouse Research and automotive engineer. So he graciously consented to an interview this afternoon. So, welcome to the interview, Sam.
Good to be back with you again, Markham. It's been too long.
Well, indeed it has, and it's my fault for not extending the invitation, and I won't do that again.
All
Uh,
right.
there's the amount of news coming out of the electric vehicle industry is it's like a tsunami. It's drinking from a fire hose. But there's one
More
that,
like more like a giant pipeline, but
yeah, sure, 48 inch, not the little
yeah.
guys, the 48-inch kind. But one that we haven't talked about before, you and I, and that is charging infrastructure.
hmm
And what brought that to mind is Tesla has agreed to open up its charging station, or charging system, sorry, to other makes and models. What do you make of that?
So first of all, details on the specifics are scant at this point. We don't know exactly how many of the chargers. It sounds like it's not going to be all of the chargers. It's going to be different from what they're doing in Europe. In Europe, Tesla is already required to use the CCS Type 2 charge connectors because that is the regulation in the EU. Everybody uses the same standardized connector. Here, Tesla still uses their own proprietary connector, while everyone else, except for the old Nissan Leaf, still are using the CCS Type 1. And so, what we think we know about this is that Tesla has developed something called, I think it's the Magic Dock. And some portion of the chargers at their supercharger stations will be equipped with this Magic Dock so that when you use the app, and you'll have to use the app because Tesla chargers don't have any sort of card scanner or anything like that. So when you use the Tesla app, if you've got it set up with a non-Tesla vehicle on one of these chargers, when you before you pull out the cable, it will automatically put on an adapter. So in the socket where you stick the cable in there where you're done when you're done charging, there will be a CCS adapter built in there. And so when you pull it out, that will already be attached to the cable, and then you just hook that up to your car to charge. And what this will do by opening up some portion of its charging network to non-Tesla vehicles is it will also give Tesla access to be able to get some of the funding from the infrastructure bill, the so-called NEVI funding from the U.S. infrastructure bill. So they'll get some amount of money from the U.S. government to help pay for further expansion of the charging infrastructure.
Elon Musk is making a move so that he can get more government funding. I'm shocked. Color me shocked.
I don't believe that's ever happened before, but first time for everything.
Indeed, indeed. Well, look, I don't unfortunately have an electric vehicle. That's a couple of years in the future, but I hang out on a lot of EV Facebook groups, that sort of thing, because just to see what people are saying about their experiences. And charging comes up over and over and over again. Broken chargers, chargers that are not charging. You don't get the fast rate. When is there any chatter in the industry and amongst regulators about bringing in standardized charging and building a more robust network of chargers?
So, first of all, on the standardization part of it, the infrastructure funding here in the U.S. does require standardization around that CCS connector, which I mentioned. And there are also requirements as part of that funding to hit certain reliability targets for the chargers. Now, exactly how they're going to measure that is still an unknown. We don't know exactly what the metrics are going to be, who's going to be responsible for enforcing it. If a company gets some of this funding and they don't hit those targets, what happens? We don't know that yet. So there's still a lot of unanswered questions around that. One of the hopes with Tesla coming into this as another competitor for non-Tesla vehicles is that the reliability will improve, because Tesla generally, the supercharger network is generally considered to be the most reliable of all the networks, with Electrify America typically being ranked at the bottom of the list as one of the worst, and the others somewhere in between. The challenge there, though, is that right now, a lot of the problems associated with the charger reliability have to do with software and the communications between the charger and the vehicle, because it's not like when you put gas in a car where you just stick the nozzle in, squeeze, and the gas flows into the tank. There's a lot of communications that has to go back and forth between the car and the charger about the state of charge, how much charge can the vehicle accept, when to shut it off, that sort of thing. And the standards around those communications are sometimes a little ambiguous, and so there's sometimes problems with certain chargers in certain vehicles. Right now, Tesla is kind of in an advantageous position that's very analogous to looking at Apple versus Windows or Android, where they control their entire ecosystem. They only have 4 vehicles. They all have the same software, the same hardware in them. And it's easy for Tesla to make sure the software in their chargers works with the software in their cars. Once they open that up to non-Tesla vehicles, we'll have to wait and see if they can maintain that same level of reliability, and make sure that everything continues to work smoothly with the software in other vehicles. So hopefully they will be able to do that. Certainly, despite some of my misgivings about some of the things that Tesla does, they're generally very quick in issuing software updates, and when they find bugs, they can fix that and deploy that. So hopefully that will provide an impetus to the rest of the charging industry to step up their game as well.
Well, you brought up the Inflation Reduction Act, and I'm kind of curious for your take on what that act, and it's $369 billion, and never mind the couple $100 billion from the Investment in Infrastructure Act. What will all that do to the U.S. EV industry? What can we expect over the next 5-10 years?
Well, one of the big things is we're going to see a continuing shift towards localizing production of EVs and battery materials in North America. In order to get things like the clean vehicle tax credit that comes with the IRA, the vehicles have to be assembled in North America, and eventually they also have to have a certain amount of North American content in the batteries, or at least content from countries that the U.S. has free trade agreements with. So the combination of that, and also these companies trying to hit their sustainability targets by reducing transportation of materials and goods around the world, which adds a lot to the life cycle emissions of a vehicle. We're going to see a continuing shift, and we've already seen a number of companies accelerate some of their plans for North American production. Hyundai pulled ahead their plans for their new plant in Georgia. We've seen Toyota is going to be building EVs in Kentucky in a couple of years. We've also seen more investment in raw materials extraction and processing throughout North America, and quite a bit in Canada, as well as the U.S. And probably Mexico eventually as well. So that just generally localization of the entire production ecosystem.
Now, you go out, you talk to the various company reps when you're working on stories about doing your research about electric vehicles. What's the water cooler chatter? We get the press releases and we get the interviews with the CEOs, but what's the water cooler chatter with the folks who are on the ground about how this is going to roll out? Is it feasible? What are those folks in the industry thinking?
So, there's only so much that the automakers themselves can control. They are certainly making huge investments in converting assembly plants over to building electric vehicles over the next several years, and quite a few already have been converted and are now producing electric vehicles. They're also making huge investments in battery production, battery cell production. And also investing further down the value chain in some direct investment in the raw material production. But there are still concerns. We talked about charger reliability earlier. If EV drivers have a bad experience, a consistently bad experience with chargers and not being able to charge their vehicles, that's going to be a real problem. And that's something that automakers have a real concern about. And so, in some cases, they are making direct investments there, like General Motors is. Mercedes-Benz recently announced that at CES. And in other cases, they're trying to work more closely with the charging networks to make sure they have the data about failed sessions. But that's a huge concern, especially as you look further out as vehicles, more of these EVs move from the new car market into the used car market, which is substantially larger than the new car market. And you've got people that a higher percentage of those owners of used vehicles or buyers of used vehicles that don't live in single family homes with off-street parking. They're going to be reliant on public charging. And if those drivers can't rely on the chargers, they're not going to buy EVs. The other big concern is with the electrical distribution network, the grid. And there are a lot of very valid concerns with that. It's in need of some substantial updates, a lot of investment. Some of that is happening, but that's going to take a long time, before that is as fully reliable as it needs to be to get electrons where they need to be when they need to be there.
Well, I can tell you from some interviews that the state of the power grid and the amount of upgrading and modernizing it needs to do is a huge challenge. We don't see that as much in Canada. I think, we have here in Canada, we have 10 little islands of electricity systems. It's not integrated. There's no regional planning. Most trade goes north and south, not east and west. But generally, as a rule, the power grids are pretty reliable. Now, speaking of Canada, I wanted to ask you about Project Arrow, and so this is a prototype that was put together by the Parts Suppliers Association in Canada, and it's made up entirely of products that are manufactured in Canada, and it's been released. It was launched not that long ago. What's your take on it, and have you had a chance to have a look
I
at
thought
it?
John Diefenbaker killed the Arrow like 65 years ago. No, I think this is an interesting project. As you said, it's put together by the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association, a trade association of Canadian parts suppliers to the auto industry. And my understanding is that this is, primarily it was built as a showcase of the capabilities of Canadian-based suppliers of all the major components required for an EV, to demonstrate to the industry, look, whatever you need for your EVs, you can come to us. We can provide it, from motors, batteries, power electronics, all the major components. We can do the development, the manufacturing, and just to showcase what is possible just within the Canadian part of the industry. So I think that, from that perspective, I think it's a worthwhile project. I don't think that this vehicle itself, will probably ever turn into a real production vehicle, but then again, you never know. There are quite a few EV startups that, are trying to break into the industry, and it's possible that somebody may come along and say, hey, we like that design. We like what you've done here. Let's work together, and we'll get the funding to get assembly going, and we can, let's do this. That's probably unlikely, but it's certainly possible.
Well, I hope they do, because it's a great looking SUV. I
Mhm.
really like it. And if it performs as good as it looks, I'd buy one in a heartbeat. Well, Sam, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure to talk to you, Markham. Have a great day.